All right, ladies and gentlemen, on to our first keynote for today. We are going to talk about what the future of AI demands next as we dive into the next human tech era where AI is not just an application but an infrastructure. So we're going to explore the evolving role of governance, ethics, and public institutions in building resilient and trustworthy AI systems for the future. Please join me to welcome on stage our next speaker, Professor Urs Gasser, the board member of the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator. Guest on stage. Professor, over to you.
Good morning, dear Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored, I'm grateful, and I'm anxious. I'm honored to contribute this summit as a researcher, as someone who helps to build bridges from academia, the worlds of science, to policy and practice. And I'm honored to contribute as a non-ASEAN voice to this regional conversation that will have a global impact. I'm grateful not only for the invitation, but also for the organizers' foresight to address a big question, the question what the future of AI demands next. So, unlike other events where we start with a flashy TED Talk-like presentation about the shiny technology, we start with a bigger, harder problem. And that leads to my anxiety. Unfortunately, I will not have all the answers to this question. So what I hope I can do over the next 20 minutes or so is share with you what I've learned over the past 25 years studying the interaction between technology and society across different continents. I spent 20 years in the United States. I'm originally from Switzerland. I work at the Technical University of Munich. I've taught in China. I've spent a lot of time in this part of the world. And so please allow me to take some risk by not presenting something polished today, but share my thinking based on observations and learnings across continents, across disciplines, working also with policymakers in the region. So the first point I would like to make is one about timing and perspective. We've heard it before, and the ministers set the stage beautifully. Of course, we are experiencing what you may call a perfect storm. We're in a moment of huge acceleration where we see this massive increase in data. So there are some statistics here just for illustrative purposes, right? That 90% of the data that has ever been created has been created within the past 2 years is the estimate. Similarly, we see this dramatic rise in computing power, again, an exponential curve. We see smarter and more powerful algorithms making their way out of the labs into the wild. Now, I just want to remind us, while this is a perfect storm, while this is a moment of tremendous exponential growth and acceleration, this has a long history. So if you think just about data and the collection capabilities and the creation of data goes well back to the rise of the internet, to the 70s. If you look at AI as a math problem, it goes back to the 50s. So while we feel this is a very special moment, and it certainly is, we should not forget that many policy decisions of the past have led to what we are experiencing today. And likewise, I would argue there's another maybe insight to keep in mind as we reflect also on this history of technology, and that is that we tend to overestimate the short-term impact of technology on societies, but underestimate the longer-term impact. And I think that's something to keep in mind as well. So let me start with the first thesis, the first observation. I'm very encouraged by the panel we've heard before. I think the biggest challenge ahead to respond to our prompt for this session is not necessarily technological. Yes, of course, we are all interested, excited, sometimes obsessed with the advancements in technology. But most likely, the biggest challenges ahead are socio-technical in nature, and the ministers pointed it all out already. Technology that we see now being adopted has already started to outpace our policy and governance frameworks. We talked about it, as well as our grounded practices. I just want to give you one example that has to do with decision governance. How do we think about a moment where machines, now increasingly autonomous, as the minister pointed out, are working hand in hand, presumably with humans? You don't even have to look at advanced AI systems to see the challenge. Take the autopilot as an example of a machine autopilot, human pilot interaction. The first autopilots were introduced in 1912. So it's a long time ago, right? And we've had quite some experience in a very controlled environment, in a very highly regulated industry, with incident report mechanisms and the like, to figure out how to best bring together the computer, the autopilot, and the human pilot. Now, guess what? And I suggest you don't read the report if you board the airplane anytime soon. In 2023, the US aviation authorities issued a circular, which you see here on the slide, suggesting that airlines should better make sure pilots learn how to fly airplanes again, because there has been an over-reliance on autopilots as documented by a series of accidents. Now take this as just as a cautionary tale, right? This is a very controlled environment, a lot of time between 1912 and 2023 to figure out the best interaction between machines and humans. And now what's happening now is, of course, we roll out AI systems, much more advanced systems that start to shape how humans make decisions, sometimes take over decision-making from the humans. At scale, we introduce it, we've heard it in transportation, in health, in education, and the like. Now, how do we think about this challenge if we are interested in good decision-making, if we haven't even figured it out in a very controlled setting? So that's something we think about. And if you look at the recent meta-study published in Nature, you see that currently, when you combine across different areas of life, different application and use cases, AI systems and humans, you see worse performance compared to if the human acts alone or the AI acts alone. So we're not very good at this yet, right? And yet we feel this is going to be the future where machines and humans work together. So these are really hard questions. Now, we've heard from the minister as well, the rise of agentic AI. We now have tools in our pockets where more than 100 AI agents are starting to organize in different roles when we ask a question in a ChatGPT type of tool. Now, these agents start to carry out tasks and transactions on behalf of us. They communicate with each other. But of course, they also interact ultimately with human beings again. Now, think about this complexity and the question, do we have an understanding of responsibility? Who's responsible for what when decisions are made in this complicated new environment? What about liability? What if things go wrong? What about human agency? So to be very honest with you, I don't think we have the answers to these sorts of questions, and even the most advanced ethical frameworks or legal frameworks currently do not have answers to that. So speaking of law, Some countries, you've heard it, have rushed to legislation, particularly the European Union, and Europe is where I'm coming from originally, by enacting a holistic law, a very comprehensive law called the AI Act. And European politicians are very proud of this piece of legislation, are hoping that it will create a sort of a Brussels effect, like the GDPR, like what we've seen in data protection. Now, I would caution against the idea that it is a good idea to take this law and copy and paste it, as it has happened with data protection, even in this part of the world. I think what we need is much more what was emphasized during the panel discussion, which is to embrace the diversity of approaches, of governance approaches, which include, as was discussed, not only laws and regulations, but importantly also standards, ethical standards, technical standards, best practices. That's absolutely important because, again, the truth is we do not know whether the AI Act, as kind of the gold standard of AI regulation, will work or not. We do not even know what it means, actually. There's a tremendous effort on the way right now now that we have a law in place in Europe, to figure out what it means to create the technical standards after the facts, to even understand what compliance means. Even the people who wrote the AI Act can't tell you what it really means. So that doesn't seem to be a great idea to rush to regulation. So what we've been arguing is, let's take a realist approach to AI governance and exactly promote the kind of diversity of approaches, because we do not know what works and what not. But there is one important condition which was also mentioned. We have to learn from each other and the real-world experiments that are happening in different countries. And here again, the ASEAN region is of tremendous promise as a learning laboratory also for the world, also internationally. And of course, I would also agree that there is a way to deal with diversity in a productive way that prevents fragmentation, which is this notion of interoperability that was so eloquently introduced and emphasized. So let's think carefully about all the tools available in the toolbox and not necessarily rush to a gold standard here, presumably set by Europe. Third observation. So far, and we have this theme already introduced, data was some sort of the scarce resources. But I think we're now in a world where we have an abundance of data, but have yet a different problem, which was emphasized before, and that's the trust challenge. We have a trust problem. We cannot build a resilient and responsible world with AI without earning and maintaining the trust, not only of users, but of citizens. Now, there's some good news. As societies, as cultures, we have become very good at developing trust mechanisms. My fun example is the Californian sushi roll, which actually was a problem because sushis were not well accepted in the US in the first place because it has unknown seaweed, unknown to the people around the sushi roll. So it was turned around and the rice, which was familiar, put outside. But more seriously, we have seen other trust mechanisms. For instance, when the cars were first introduced, you had an automotive act requiring that a man with a red flag was walking in front of the car as a mechanism of trust for the new automotive. Now, it turned out that didn't work very well because these cars often exploded, which was the real safety risk and not the speed. But what I want to propose to you is, in the past, we may have developed mechanisms as societies that were guaranteeing or some sort of creating trust how systems function, that technical systems perform well. And we had hacks to create this trust. But as we enter the age of AI, maybe it's not only about this functional trust anymore, but about what is called fiduciary trust, which is to say that these extremely powerful tools that we now have are available are not only functioning, but they are acting in the best interest of their users. And that shift from functional to fiduciary trust is something, again, we haven't really realized what the implications are, both for governance, but also for design of reliable products. So I will be brief on the last two because the ministers already introduced the topic quite extensively. We must create learning institutions. The only way we can keep pace with the rapid technological innovations is to build institutions that are learning systems. They must be designed for experimentation, for learning together. Good news again is we have a number of tools already available. We can observe each other. We can create observatories. We can anticipate, science anticipation, and just has been mentioned. We can build networks like the ASEAN Safety, AI Safety Network, and other networks that have been mentioned. We can create spaces of policy learning and experimentation, like the AI Governance Clinic in Thailand. And we can think innovatively about our guardrail systems. Guardrails have been mentioned as well. We've written books about it in case you're interested. So I think that's the overall direction that we need to work together across disciplines, across private, public, and also across research communities, academia, and policymakers to advance and figure out what it means to create learning organizations and institutions. So, in a way, the biggest challenge is not so much to imagine what the technology of tomorrow is. I think the biggest challenge and worthy challenge in front of us is to reimagine what society is. What's the kind of future we want to live in, that we want to build together using the best available technology? There have been calls to stop the development of AI. I think that's neither realistic nor desirable. We need the best technology to solve some of the world's biggest problems, whether it's in health or whether it's in social justice or whether it's in resource optimization. You name the challenge of the day, climate. So what we probably need to do, and I end here with two examples, is we need to rethink education. I'm using here, just by way of example, my own university, the Technical University of Munich, where we now have brought the social sciences to a technical university that has over 50,000 students to co-design and reimagine the curriculum that, for instance, computer scientists will have to go through to really understand that the technologies they're developing are not only technical matters, but have to see in a holistic societal context. We are connecting the social science researchers with the scientists in the labs at much earlier stage as an attempt to ensure that technology is, again, serving, as it was mentioned, humanity, and the planet. So these are the kinds of innovations we need. We just created 50 new professorships to build this bridge. These are some sort of the bottom-up interventions, I believe, we need to advance. And lastly, of course, we need to open up also in academia and work with citizens. So, for instance, we're working with artists and museums to really use the creativity of young people in particular to ask this question: what is the world you would like to work and live in the future? How do you reimagine the future in which technology plays such an important role? These are just kind of some observations and hopefully some food of thought to keep in mind as you go into various sessions, and we'll hear many exciting talks about the promise of AI. Just maybe the main message again, probably this is less about the technology, and the biggest opportunity is what does AI teach us as about humans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing with us your thoughts on what the future of AI demands next.